The turning point that made me realize burnout and trauma are not the same, but they often overlap was when I realized I was recovering from burnout and trauma symptoms. When I thought I was just recovering from burnout, it was truly trauma symptoms that had surfaced. You see, most recovery fails because the wrong problem is treated. Because stress strategies don't heal trauma, while trauma strategies don't resolve burnout. We have to be able to look at both and examine the symptoms and treat it appropriately. Because precision matters if recovery is going to work. And so, what does burnout actually look like? You see, chronic stress does cause injury to your nervous system. And the reason for that is your nervous system is constantly on edge. It's sensing everything going on around you, trying to decipher, is this a perceived threat, a real threat, or can I become safe again? And that is a hard place to be. Because when we are driven by success, it sustains this overload. And so it's not just one singular event that causes burnout. It's one stressful event after another. It's that long term, that chronic compounding effect that drives that sustained overload on your system. And this often results in feeling exhausted, detached, and having a reduced efficacy. For a lot of people, they feel like what they're doing doesn't matter. They don't feel like they have autonomy for their work anymore. And they just question what they're doing. Does it really matter? Because it requires capacity to restore and regulate. So we have to have the capacity to do those things. And most people in today's work world don't feel like they have the ability or the capacity within themselves to make sure they're restoring so that they can function in that calm state. And this is not just a mindset or a motivational problem. It is a systems issue. So today we're talking more about our internal system. I have other videos that talk about the organizational, the workplace system, which affects both. So how does this differ from what trauma is? So trauma is actually when your nervous system is overwhelmed from that perceived threat, right? It's an experience that you go through that one for most people is going to feel traumatic because it stays stored in their body. It's not just a memory. It can become a trauma if you have not recovered in effective ways after the event and if you did not have the support. And there's a lot of other symptoms that come with trauma. It's hypervigilance, which is something I experienced. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I was very aware of who is in the room or the building with me, even with family. You might shut down, right? Where you want to retreat, not interact with people. So if you have to go to an event or a function, you might be the one hiding off in the corner against the wall where you can watch the whole room but not have to interact. For a lot of people who have stored trauma, they feel like they're just constantly dysregulated, that they can't get their footing back on solid ground. And remember that trauma can be both acute and chronic experiences. So it can be what I might term today as small events and to others, large events. It can be one isolated event or it can be multiple events. And how we define that is really based on an individual basis. But to recover from trauma does require that safety component because we can't process things if we're not safe. And we have to somatically help our body process. So just like we talked about in the first video, we have to have ways to release stress and allow our bodies to release that. Well, when we're working through trauma, we also need to have that somatic processing so our bodies can release it. And so most recovery often can miss the mark because we might use productivity tools to treat burnout. And this can fail in terms of if we're not focused on renewing our energy capacity and healing our physical body, productivity tools are not going to be as helpful. They are helpful and they are part of my program, but that's designed for a specific piece of the process. But we have to look at the whole picture. And so productivity tools help with feeling like you're accomplishing things, giving you organization and systems so that you can keep moving forward when your brain's just not functioning right. But again, if we don't focus on that energy capacity and we don't focus on that physiological recovery and biological recovery, we're not going to overcome burnout. Often people mistake that we just have to do mindset work to treat trauma. And again, that's only a small piece of the puzzle. We can't just take one piece of healing and expect it to fix everything. We have to have a piece from all these different components, right? So for trauma, that's yes, we have to work on some cognitive stuff and some mindset. We also have to work on some emotional regulation and working through those emotions. And then we have to work on that somatic release so your body can let go of what it's been holding on to. And a lot of times it holds on to it because it doesn't know what else to do with it. Recovery often mistakes that exhaustion is laziness. And I hear this all the time from leaders I've worked with. So-and-so is just lazy. I would question that. Are they lazy or are they exhausted because they've been in a state of long-term stress for too long? We have to be cautious of what we're examining and how we're examining it and what we're labeling. Because in treating our nervous system when we're dysregulated isn't just an attitude change. Oftentimes it can be mistaken as that because we might be irritable and just snap at people. But is that an attitude or is that a nervous system that's dysregulated? We cannot skip the important component of regulating our nervous system and going straight to behavior change. Because if our nervous system is not regulated, we are not going to get that behavior change effectively. They go hand in hand, and we have to look at what's preceding the other. Behavior is a language. It says something's going on, and I'm not sure what I need to change here. But it's giving voice to what's going on in the body when we don't always have words to go with it. So we need to look at, it's not just a behavior, what's causing the behavior, what's underneath that layer. That's what's going to help. And so what truly happens when burnout and trauma overlap? Recovery often can become slower and more confusing. It's confusing because we're not sure what we have to treat and what we have to work on. And that's where guided help can come in because we do similar things, but at the end of the day, they're also very different. And yes, symptoms can start to overlap. The way I view burnout and trauma is we go from our baseline, which is functioning in a calm state, and think of it like this ladder. We're in a calm state, so things are fine. Things are not super stressful. Stress might come and go, right? Where we jump up to stress and we come back. This is the idea. We jump and come back. But when we're in that chronic stress, that long-term stress, we climb to that third rung. And then, as we talked about in the previous video, when we've been at this level for too long, we will go higher into burnout, where we just don't know if we can give anymore and we don't know if anything matters. And this is where it starts to affect your physiological health. Well, where trauma overlaps is we continue to try to function in that state of burnout. We're going to keep climbing the ladder and land in trauma. So I mentioned at the beginning, this is what I noticed in my own journey. I thought I was just burnt out. I made a change after my doctor said my job was killing me. That change actually made the symptoms worse. It was in that change where I believe I started developing those trauma symptoms because I didn't fully stop working. I did not change the type of work I was doing. I did and I didn't, but I was still working with individuals who were highly reactive, and they were functioning in survival mode all the time despite having help. And that led to my response, right? That secondary traumatic response where I couldn't even be around family without looking over my shoulder. I did not like them behind me. And so we have to be cautious. It's a fine line when they start to overlap and how far into that trauma response we go. And so when we start to get this overlap, these traditional strategies often feel ineffective, right? So if I'm just working on breathing and my mindset, I'm not going to feel like it's effective. But if I start to work on healing the biology that was affected, and I'm doing the mindset, and I'm doing the emotional work to release stuff, it's going to be helpful. But it's also a tailored process to each one of you. And I want you to hear that you can recover. This overlap doesn't have to happen. We often misplace that and believe that rest isn't going to restore your energy, but it will. We're supposed to have rest. Our bodies and our brains need it, and that's part of what helps us recover. Whether we're burnt out or we're experiencing trauma symptoms, rest is part of the process for that healing and restoring your energy. I talk a lot about sleep. Sleep is a foundational component that we have to restore, no matter whether you're dealing with trauma memories or you're dealing with burnout. We have to restore your sleep because that's where your body and your mind recover and repair. We often think, oh, they're just not motivated. They just need to be motivated. No, because motivation doesn't return you back to your baseline and your calm state. If you used to be a motivated person and you just can't find that motivation, you're probably burnt out, and we have to explore that. And people tend to blame themselves instead of looking at what's changed in their biology, right? So if your physiological response has shifted, it's shifting to what's been going on around you and inside of you, which isn't necessarily your fault. It's your body doing what it's supposed to do to protect you. And so we have to stop blaming ourselves for what's happened. And so there are ways to recover. And that framework really is about regulating before we can optimize, right? So if you're a high performer and you're like, I just want to get back to being able to accomplish as much as I used to, great. Let's learn to regulate and recover first, because we have to have that sense of safety before we can strategize. We can't step into strategy if we don't feel safe. And that has to be in all of our environments. We need that safety. We also have to regulate before we can be productive. Because again, if we're emotionally dysregulated, our prefrontal cortex is not functioning very well, so our productivity levels will decline. And we have to focus on that energy capacity before our performance will improve. Because if you can't manage your energy levels, or let's say your nervous system is managing it for you, your performance will decline. But it can change. We also need to focus on that nervous system stabilization, which is a foundational component. Just like sleep is a foundational component, we have to get our nervous system calmed back down and re-regulated. And so I want you to think that individualized and precise treatment and support replaces generic advice. So I can tell you that yes, sleep is foundational for every person. How that looks is where it's individualized. I can't give the same advice to each person because each person is different. And I've seen that. I've seen what works for one person not work for another, but something else does. So we have to have that individualized and precise process for our own recovery. One of the things you can do though is if you are overwhelmed and your nervous system is dysregulated, remember it's not failure. But you might check out the 5-day challenge. It's called the Breakthrough Burnout Challenge, and it's posted in the description below. But what this does is gives you that framework that you can individualize where you're going to start to feel that immediate relief. The tools in there are very simple and they are science-backed. And I've had hundreds of clients walk through this framework and feel relief in a matter of 2 weeks. It's not a long-term process to start to feel relief. It is a longer-term process to get back to who you used to be and who you want to be. But this Breakthrough Burnout Challenge just gives you that fast reset when your nervous system is overloaded and your brain just won't cooperate. So check it out, because remember, you can't fix the wrong problem and expect real recovery, because burnout and trauma do require different interventions. But start with the nervous system regulation, because clarity is the first form of healing.